Domestic violence is a pattern of incidents of threatening, controlling or coercive, violent or abusive behaviour. This can be between intimate partners but also family members. So for example, we have physical abuse, which is one a lot of people think of first when they think of domestic abuse. So that can be things from hitting, slapping, biting, to grabbing, throwing things when you're in an argument as well, when your partner's angry, and in extreme cases it also does result in murder. So something that we see a lot in young people who are very on social media and things like this is looking through your phone with or without your permission is not okay. Another red flag would be controlling who you like on social media.
Yeah.
So if
or who you hang out with in real life
or
as well.
who you hang out with in real life, definitely, that's a big one. If they have a lot to say about who you're spending your time with, because a really common tactic of abusers is to isolate their victim.
In this country, every 6 seconds, a woman is assaulted. And in the last year, 1.6 million women have experienced abuse. I've spoken to the charity Refuge about how their helpline calls have increased during lockdown. And they said a lot of the calls are from people who have had these light bulb moments. I guess when you're in lockdown, you're spending more time at home, there's less distractions, and it's really opened their eyes to the abuse. Hitting is not love, mind games are not love, put downs are not love, controlling is not love. And if they do it often, it isn't a mistake.
Domestic abuse is incredibly prevalent across all communities. And if we look at the statistics, it's 1 in 4 women that experience domestic abuse in their lifetime in the UK. And actually, if we look at global studies, the prevalence is even higher. So the World Health Organization, for example, did a study where they found that it's 1 in 3 women globally experience domestic abuse. So I think that in itself is really quite telling about how prevalent the situation is. And I think given that perhaps, we ought to think a little bit about domestic abuse in terms of the pandemic and COVID, and also kind of the impact of the lockdown, I think it is quite likely that the domestic abuse incidents would have increased, but probably the exact data will be fully available a little bit later on. Statistics will probably start coming in a little bit later when it comes to the full impact of the pandemic. And also there probably would be a little bit of a delay in having that data, because actually if people are stuck in the households together with their abusive partners, it would be really quite difficult for them to report domestic abuse incidents. So I think in that sense, we're still kind of yet to witness what's the extent of domestic abuse, or what was the extent of domestic abuse during the pandemic and the lockdowns.
There's definitely a different sort of aspect to domestic abuse and violence that it isn't discussed as openly, which can come in many forms and is often quite slyly done. So that can be through coercion, manipulation.
There's cyber abuse, which is something that particularly affects younger people. So that can be like cyber stalking, revenge porn. Yeah, there's also financial abuse.
Yes, that's huge. So if you ever have to rely on a partner for money, of course that does happen in normal life. However, that partner could then use that against you, use that as a reason for you not to leave, or use that as a way to get you to do things for them. For example, a very clear example would be in exchange for sex. Or if you're living with a partner and maybe they pay rent, maybe you can't afford your own rent, or you haven't got your own living situation, and you would like to leave because of some of their behaviours, you can't, because they have financial control over you. So that's definitely quite a tricky one, and I don't think that's one that's often viewed as domestic abuse, but definitely is a form of that.
Yeah, definitely. There's also sexual abuse, sexual violence, which can also happen in intimate relationships. There's lots of myths around rape, the idea that rape happens, you know, a stranger in an alley,
Yeah.
whereas actually over 90% of perpetrators of rape were known to the victim. A really common and complex form of domestic abuse is gaslighting. It's a word that we hear a lot at the moment, but it sometimes can be hard to pin down exactly what it is. So the term gaslight comes from a 1938 play in which a man is trying to steal his wife's jewellery. And so he makes her go mad by flickering the gaslights, and she keeps going, the gaslights are flickering. He goes, no, you're imagining things, and she goes mad by the end of the play. So that's the origin of the word. But what it actually means when we're talking about domestic abuse is questioning someone's reality and making them reliant on your narrative of what is true. So this can be things like if you're very upset, your partner's upset you, them going, you're overreacting, you're being crazy. That's a really common one. But it can also involve things like lying, misinformation.
And can be very slyly done.
Yes,
I think that's the really big thing about gaslighting is we often don't even see it happening to ourselves, and we often don't want to make the accusation that someone is gaslighting you because that suggests that they are outright manipulating or lying to you, which is essentially what it is. But I feel like maybe because it's also such a buzzword at the moment, we don't like to put that on people. We don't like, it's similar to calling someone a rapist, you know. We could call way more people than we do rapists, but we don't because it's a terrifying label to place onto someone. I think gaslighting is a very similar thing. I think gaslighting is also important to note that it's not just romantic relationships that this happens. It happens so often within families, within friendships.
And it's so toxic, and it makes you really question your experiences.
I think it can be, I mean, it is a form of manipulation in and of itself, and it is a form of abuse in and of itself, but what's also really scary about gaslighting is it's also such an easy gateway. It's such an easy, because as soon as a partner or an individual has that sort of sense of control over your mind, over your reality, when they get you to a point where you can't trust your gut or where you can't trust your thoughts and your emotions because of the information that they are giving you, it then opens up a whole world of other forms of abuse that they can use on you because you won't feel you can question it. Because it'll immediately be, no, they wouldn't do that to me, or no, I can't, no, I'm overreacting. Overreacting, I think, this idea that we're overreacting is a huge one, and that's why in a lot of our work with young people, we always say, trust your gut.
Abusers usually have a sob story, a trauma from their past or their childhood, so that you feel sorry for them. But feeling bad for them is part of their game. Whatever they've been through does not justify their behaviour towards you and them abusing you. And it's important to remember that mental health is not an excuse either. If your partner is abusive and has mental health issues, they have two separate problems. Now, a lot of people find it hard to leave their partner because of something called trauma bonds. It's an emotional bond which stems from cycles of abuse. I'm going to give you some indications of having a trauma bond. So, when you look at their jealousy as a sign of love, when you deny the abuse or you justify the abuse, when you want to protect your partner and fix them, when you're holding on to hope for change, and euphoric recall, which is when you only remember the good times. When the person you go to for comfort and relief is the same person who's destroying you, that is a trauma bond. You have to be so careful because there are lots of subtle abusers out there who can fake empathy really well. For example, being entitled, not taking accountability, blaming others, degrading your partner, devaluing them, manipulation, silent treatment, double standards, and playing victim. And playing victim to circumstances that they created. And a lot of time you have to step away from the relationship and view it from the outside to see clearly, to see that you deserve better. And it's normal to think it was so different in the beginning. You know, where did that person go? The truth is that person wasn't real.
And I think one thing that is really helpful to think about is how we talk to children about healthy relationships. And I think There is some progress that we are making at the moment. So the DFE has released some guidance on relationship and sex education that will become statutory for all of the schools to follow. And with that guidance, relationship education is something of a statutory duty for schools to teach their pupils about. And the same goes for secondary schools, except that secondary schools will also have to teach children about the sex education side of things as well. It's really important to teach children about respect towards each other, about setting boundaries, about being able to say no. And there's a lot as well about some personal skills and knowledge that children need to be taught around confidence and believe in themselves and self-esteem and their well-being. And there's really so much to the topic of domestic abuse that isn't necessarily using these words, domestic abuse, but actually is directly linked to how we enable children to then form healthy relationships in the future, but also lead very healthy kind of lives and have healthy relationships that aren't just intimate, that are kind of has that much broader concept around it. So thinking about peer groups and within their own kind of family.